The afternoon light outside the doctor's office seemed exhausted, as if even the sun had grown tired of shining. Rain pressed itself against the wide window panes, blurring the skyline of Seoul into a wash of indistinct shapes. Inside, the room smelled faintly of antiseptic and polished metal, a place designed to be clean, controlled, and emotionally neutral. Yet in that stillness, something irreversible was unfolding. The world, at least as Seo Jun-ho had always known it, was slowly losing its color, draining away into a suffocating gray. Seo Jun-ho sat rigidly in the sterile chair, his posture immaculate from decades of discipline on the conductor's podium. Across from him, the doctor leaned forward, lips moving in careful, rehearsed patterns. To Jun-ho, those movements no longer carried sound in a meaningful way. Words arrived late and distorted, as if filtered through thick water, their edges softened into useless noise. He focused on the doctor's mouth, reading fragments rather than hearing them, clinging to the shape of language as the substance slipped away. The fragments assembled themselves against his will. Progressive, nerve damage, 3 months. Total silence. Each phrase landed with a dull weight, like stones dropped into a deep well. Jun-ho did not flinch. His face remained composed, but inside, a long, invisible corridor seemed to stretch endlessly forward, empty of music. For a man who had lived his entire life through sound, the idea of silence was not peace. It was annihilation. Jun-ho turned his gaze toward the window, away from the doctor's concerned eyes. Rain streaked down the glass in uneven lines. Once, those lines would have ignited his synesthesia, transforming into living silver threads that shimmered and vibrated in time with the imagined rhythm of the storm. He used to see rain sing. Now, the same rain appeared flat and heavy, its color a lifeless slate gray. The visual music that had guided him since childhood was fading, unraveling as his hearing decayed. His synesthesia had never been a trick or a novelty. It was the core of his genius, the secret language through which symphonies revealed themselves to him in blazing hues and delicate shades. Violins burned gold, cellos bled deep crimson, brass exploded in violent blues. To lose it felt like watching a masterpiece slowly erased stroke by stroke, while still being forced to stand before the canvas.
3 months. Can I conduct?
His voice was calm, almost disturbingly so, betraying none of the storm tightening in his chest. It was the voice he used on stage, steady and commanding, a voice that had bent orchestras to his will. Asking the question was not an act of hope. It was a challenge, a refusal to surrender quietly to the verdict that had just been delivered.
Mr. Seo, you should retire. You need rest. The stress accelerates the loss.
The doctor's tone softened, shaped by sympathy and professional caution. Years of medical training urged restraint, preservation, and acceptance. He spoke as if offering mercy, unaware that to Jun-ho, rest was a far crueler sentence than exhaustion. To step away from music now would not slow the end. It would only make the remaining time unbearable.
I do not need rest. I need a finale.
Jun-ho rose from the chair in a single, decisive motion. The faint scrape of its legs against the floor sounded distant, already slipping beyond his reach. He buttoned his cashmere coat with deliberate care, his fingers steady and ritualistic, as if this small act of control could anchor him to himself. Without waiting for another word, he turned and walked out of the office, leaving behind the sterile safety of diagnosis and prognosis. The hallway swallowed him, long and pale, echoing with footsteps he barely perceived. 3 months, 1 season. The limits of his remaining life as a conductor crystallized with brutal clarity. In that shrinking span of time, there was room for only one truth, one final statement to the world that had defined him. Mahler's Ninth Symphony rose in his mind like a monument. It was not merely difficult, it was a farewell carved into music, demanding absolute vulnerability from everyone who touched it. To conduct it required more than precision. It required a soul willing to bleed openly before an audience. Jun-ho knew it would be his last, and perhaps that was why it mattered more than anything he had ever done. Yet his orchestra, flawless as it was, felt hollow to him now. Each musician executed their part with machine-like accuracy, every note perfectly placed and utterly lifeless. Technique without fire, sound without color. They could follow him, but they could not ignite the symphony. Not anymore. What he needed was a spark, a presence capable of cutting through the encroaching gray. Someone whose music still burned brightly enough to be seen, even by failing senses. Somewhere out there existed a color that had not yet faded, a sound with a soul of fire. And in the time he had left, Seo Jun-ho intended to find it. Gangnam subway station at 10 o'clock at night was a living organism, pulsing and heaving beneath the city. Trains roared like metal beasts diving into tunnels. Brakes shrieked, turnstiles clicked in endless succession, and thousands of footsteps merged into a single oppressive roar. The air was thick with perfume, sweat, damp coats, and exhaustion. For most people, it was just another night commute. For Jun-ho, it was an assault, an endless, muddy brown chaos that pressed against his skull until every nerve felt rubbed raw. Jun-ho moved through the crowd with his head lowered and shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing against an invisible storm. His noise-canceling headphones were already on, a shield he relied on more than he cared to admit. Even through them, the station bled noise, vibrations seeping through bone rather than air. He focused on the rhythm of his steps and on the promise of his car and the silence beyond it, unaware that this routine night was seconds away from fracture. Then he stopped, not gradually and not with deliberation, but as if an unseen hand had seized him by the spine. Something slipped through the electronic hush of his headphones, something that did not belong to the station's brutal soundtrack. It was a single, sustained note, thin at first, then widening and blooming into something impossible. The sound cut cleanly through the noise, not louder, but clearer and undeniable. It was a violin. Yet, it was nothing like the screeching, hurried attempts of subway buskers he had learned to tune out over the years. This sound had weight and temperature. To Jun-ho's synesthetic senses, it was color. Molten, blinding gold, flowing and alive. It pierced through the padding of his headphones and through the gray fog that had settled in his mind for months. Jun-ho turned slowly, as though afraid a sudden movement might shatter the sound. The station seemed to recede as commuters blurred into shadows. Near a row of humming vending machines stood a woman, half hidden by concrete pillars and flickering fluorescent lights. She wore a baggy gray hoodie with the hood pulled low over messy braids and beat-up sneakers planted firmly on the grimy floor. Her eyes were closed and her posture was loose but grounded, as if she were playing for a world that existed only for her. She was playing Meditation from Thais. Jun-ho recognized it instantly, every measure etched into his bones from decades of conducting. Yet she was not playing it correctly. The tempo dragged, stretching phrases far beyond convention, and her bowing ignored rules he had enforced mercilessly in rehearsals. And yet, in that wrongness, there was truth. The melody breathed, ached, and shimmered. It was without question the most beautiful thing Jun-ho had ever heard. For the first time in months, color flooded his vision. A brilliant, blinding aura of gold radiated from the woman as she played, wrapping around her like a living halo and spilling onto the tiled floor. His chest tightened painfully as he realized this was what he had been missing. This was what the world had stolen from him without asking. He walked toward her without realizing he had made the decision to move. Each step felt heavy and dreamlike, as if gravity itself had shifted. Around him, commuters flowed past, indifferent, some dropping coins into her open case, while others did not notice her at all. Junho stopped directly in front of her, close enough to see the frayed strings on her bow and to feel the heat of that imagined gold. The final note lingered trembling in the air before dissolving into silence. With it, the gold faded, draining from the world as abruptly as it had appeared. The woman opened her eyes, widening in surprise as they landed on Junho's expensive suit, his rigid posture and his unblinking stare. Instinctively and defensively, she lowered her violin and began packing it away. Her movements were quick and practiced, as though she had learned long ago not to linger. Fingers snapped latches shut as the station's roar crashed back in full force. "I am leaving. I have a permit." Junho barely seemed to hear the words, his mind still echoing with gold.
Play it again.
"Excuse me?" She looked up, irritation flickering beneath caution.
That piece. Play it again. I need to see the color.
Her brow furrowed as confusion hardened into suspicion. "Sir, are you drunk?" She zipped up her case with finality and slung it over her shoulder. "I am going home." Panic, raw and unfamiliar, spiked through Junho.
Wait.
He reached out and closed his fingers around the edge of her case before he could stop himself.
I am Seo Junho, conductor of the Seoul Philharmonic.
The effect was immediate as her body went rigid and she slowly turned to face him. Recognition flashed in her eyes, followed by something sharper and darker. "I know who you are, the tyrant." The word struck, but Junho did not flinch.
I need you.
"No, I do not play for tyrants. I play for rent." Desperation crept into his voice, cracking his iron control.
I will pay you. Whatever you make here in a year, I will pay you for 1 hour.
She stepped back, eyes wide and breath quickening. "I said no, I do not perform. Not anymore."
Why, you have perfect pitch. Your vibrato is exquisite.
Her composure shattered. "'Cause I cannot breathe. On a stage, I cannot breathe." She turned and ran, vanishing into the surge of commuters before Junho could take another step. Junho stood frozen amid the crowd as the gold vanished and the world drained back into lifeless gray. Slowly, he lowered his gaze to the floor, where something lay abandoned. It was a name tag, old and faded, its edges curled with time. He picked it up and read the words as a slow, dawning smile spread across his face. Juilliard School of Music. Iris Muse.
Found you.
The small music school in Hongdae was wedged between a coffee shop that never slept and a fried chicken place that smelled perpetually of grease and pepper. Inside, the hallways were narrow, their walls crowded with fading posters of recitals long past, corners curling like tired smiles. The air hummed softly with overlapping scales and hesitant rhythms from different practice rooms, a chaotic symphony of children learning discipline through sound. It was not glamorous, but it was predictable, and predictability felt like safety. Iris Muse worked here as a tutor for children, a role that wrapped her days in routine. Children did not stare when her fingers betrayed her, trembling without warning. They did not whisper or speculate. They only waited, wide-eyed and trusting, their instruments balanced awkwardly against small shoulders. With them, Iris could breathe. Her own past did not loom quite so close. In this space, music was still innocent and unburdened by expectation. She stood beside a young student, carefully tuning a violin that had seen better days. The instrument's wood was scratched and its strings slightly corroded, but Iris handled it with reverence. Her ear leaned in, isolating the pitch from the surrounding noise, coaxing the string tighter, then looser, until it settled into reluctant obedience. Her hands shook faintly, a familiar tremor she had learned to hide by keeping them constantly in motion. The classroom door opened without ceremony. The hinges creaked, cutting through the soft music like a wrong note held too long. The receptionist appeared in the doorway, her expression tight and her breath slightly uneven, as though she had jogged down the hall or braced herself for an unpleasant task. "Iris, there is someone to see you." Before Iris could respond, the man stepped in. Seo Junho filled the room immediately, his presence disproportionate to the cramped, cluttered space. Music stands, child-sized chairs, and shelves of method books seemed to shrink around him. He looked like a giant trapped inside a dollhouse, all sharp angles and contained intensity. His tailored coat brushed against a stand as he moved forward, unconcerned. He did not ask permission. He placed a contract on the music stand with deliberate precision, flattening the pages with 2 fingers as if pinning down an escaping thing. The paper was thick and official, its edges crisp and utterly out of place among the pencil-scribbled sheet music and stickers shaped like smiling animals.
First chair, the Winter Gala, Mahler's Ninth.
The words landed heavily, reverberating through Iris's chest long after the sound itself faded. Her fingers loosened their hold on the violin, and she set it down with care that bordered on ritual, as if placing a fragile relic back onto an altar. Her jaw tightened as old memories stirred, sharp and unwelcome. "Get out." Junho did not react. He did not even blink. He remained where he was, his gaze fixed on her with unsettling focus, as though she were a problem he had already begun solving.
I looked you up. Iris Muse, the prodigy. 5 years ago, you were the favorite to win the Tchaikovsky competition. You walked onto the stage and you froze. You did not play a single note. You ran off and vanished.
Each sentence peeled back a layer Iris had spent years burying. Her chest tightened, her breath shortening as if the room itself had grown smaller. The fluorescent lights overhead seemed harsher, their faint buzzing suddenly unbearable. "Stop it." Her hands betrayed her then, trembling openly now, the tremor rippling from her fingers up through her wrists as if the memory had traveled directly into her nerves.
Performance anxiety, a waste of talent.
The words were clinical and stripped of empathy. They cut not because they were new, but because they echoed every cruel headline and whispered judgment she had ever imagined. "Why do you care? You have hundreds of violinists dying to play for you." Her voice rose and cracked slightly. Around them, the children stiffened, bows hovering uncertainly over strings, sensing danger without understanding it.
They are boring.
The sudden roar slammed into the room. Chairs rattled, and one child flinched as another's bow scraped accidentally across a string, producing a shrill squeal. Junho exhaled slowly and reined himself back in. When he spoke again, his voice was lower and more dangerous for its restraint. He stepped closer, invading Iris's space and forcing her to either retreat or stand her ground. She did neither. She froze, rooted to the scuffed linoleum floor.
They play the notes. You play the pain. I need the pain, Iris. My orchestra is asleep. I need you to wake them up.
The words sank into her, awakening something she had tried desperately to smother, a dark and electric recognition. Music had always hurt. That was why it had mattered. "I cannot go back on stage. I will faint. I will throw up." Her confession spilled out raw and unfiltered, the physical terror inseparable from the memory of lights, silence, and thousands of eyes waiting.
I will not let you. I will be there. I will guide you.
The certainty in his tone was infuriating, seductive, and terrifying. It promised control where she had only ever known collapse. Why me? The question was barely audible, more plea than demand. Junho studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable.
Because I like a challenge.
The lie slid easily from him, polished and convincing. He tapped the contract once, a sharp and decisive sound.
The salary is enough to buy this entire music school. Think about it.
He turned and left without another word, his footsteps receding down the narrow hallway and swallowed by the ambient noise of the school. The door clicked shut behind him, too final and too loud. Iris stood motionless. The contract seemed to glow against the music stand. Slowly, she pulled out her phone and checked her bank account balance. $400. The number felt like a verdict. Her gaze drifted back to the violin resting nearby. The instrument waited patiently, as it always had. She thought of cramped subway rides, of hiding in plain sight, of fear dictating the shape of her life. Her jaw set as hatred rose, hot and focused. With deliberate care, Iris picked up the pen. The Seoul Philharmonic Rehearsal Hall carried its own kind of memory. The polished wooden floors reflected decades of ambition, failure, triumph, and quiet despair. High above, the lights glared down like unblinking eyes, illuminating every mistake and every tremor of doubt. The air smelled faintly of rosin and old varnish, layered with the tension of an orchestra that had already decided it did not want her here. Iris felt it the moment she stepped into the first chair, as if the room itself leaned away from her. They were elite musicians, sculpted by years of discipline at the world's best conservatories. Their posture was effortless, their confidence inherited through pedigree and privilege. And then there was Iris, an American girl in a soft sweater, fingers still bearing the faint marks of long practice sessions rather than polished bravado. Her presence felt like an insult to them, a disruption of an order they believed sacred. The whispers moved quickly, slithering between music stands and coiling around her ears. Each murmur carried suspicion, envy, and contempt, sharpened by the certainty that she did not belong. Iris heard every word as if the hall amplified them just for her, turning quiet cruelty into something impossibly loud. "Who is she? Did she sleep with the conductor?" The words struck her chest like blows. Her heart slammed against her ribs, frantic and uncoordinated, as if it were trying to escape. Her vision tunneled, the edges of the world blurring into a smear of light and shadow. She clung to the violin like a lifeline, silently repeating the only instruction she could remember. Breathe. In, out, again. Each breath felt shallow, stolen, barely enough to keep her upright. Panic crept through her muscles, turning them traitorous and weak. The sharp tap of Junho's baton cracked through the room like a gunshot. The sound sliced cleanly through the whispers, freezing every musician in place.
Silence.
He did not raise his voice, yet it carried absolute authority. His gaze swept the orchestra before settling on Iris. In that single glance, he saw everything. Her fear, her self-doubt, the way her confidence was unraveling thread by thread.
Ms. Muse, the solo in the second movement. Begin.
Iris lifted her bow, though her arm felt impossibly heavy. Her hand trembled, the fine motor control she had honed over years abandoning her now. When the bow touched the strings, it bounced instead of gliding, betraying her hesitation. The sound that emerged was thin and ugly, a squeak that echoed far too loudly in the pristine hall. It sounded wrong, amateur, painfully exposed. A ripple of snickers spread through the orchestra, soft but unmistakable. Each one dug into her skin, branding her humiliation deeper.
Stop.
Junho stepped down from the podium, his shoes striking the floor with deliberate calm. He crossed the distance between them, each step amplifying the tension coiled in the room.
Everyone out, out.
The reaction was immediate. Chairs scraped back, instruments were hastily gathered, and the musicians fled as if released from captivity. Their resentment lingered in the air long after they were gone. The vast hall fell into an unnatural quiet. Without the orchestra, the space felt cavernous, every sound swallowed and returned as a hollow echo. Iris lowered her violin, her shoulders collapsing inward. Tears streamed down her face unchecked, dripping onto the polished wood below. Her voice broke as the words spilled out. "I told you, I cannot do it." Junho stopped directly in front of her. He was close enough now that she could feel the weight of his presence, steady and unyielding.
You are listening to them. You are listening to their judgment. Stop listening.
His words were sharp, but not cruel. They were diagnostic, cutting straight to the disease. "I cannot help it." The confession burst from her, raw and desperate, as if admitting weakness might finally end the struggle.
Then look at me.
He reached out and grabbed her shoulders. His grip was firm and grounding, forcing her out of herself and into the present moment.
Look at me, Iris. Ignore the empty seats. Ignore the lights. Just look at my eyes. When I lift the baton, you are not playing for the world. You are playing for me.
Her breath hitched as she focused on him. The hall, the judgment, and the imagined audience began to fade. "You are scary." The words escaped her with a shaky laugh, half fear and half awe.
I am. I am the scariest thing in this room. So if you can handle me, you can handle anything.
He released her and stepped back, restoring the space between them, but not the distance. His presence remained an anchor.
Again, look at me.
He raised his hands and began to conduct without a baton. Every movement was precise and intentional, sculpting silence into anticipation. Iris locked onto his eyes. They were intense, demanding absolute honesty, yet beneath that intensity was something solid and unwavering. She lifted her bow once more. This time, when she played, the sound bloomed. It filled the hall, rich and confident, soaring where it had faltered before. Junho closed his eyes as the music washed over him. Colors exploded behind his lids, gold first, radiant and warm, followed by waves of crimson and violet so vivid they almost burned. Each note carried intention, pain, longing, and defiance intertwined. He heard everything, the subtle slides between notes, the breath hidden in the phrasing, and the emotion poured unguarded into the strings. For those moments, the weight of his own mortality loosened its grip. He was not dying. He was infinite. When the final note faded, the echo lingered like a held breath. Iris stood panting, adrenaline humming through her veins. A dizzy euphoria settled over her. She had done it. She looked at Junho, searching his face. His expression was unreadable, stripped of anger or judgment. What remained was something sharper and deeper. It was hunger.
Good, tomorrow, same time.
Late night settled heavily over Junho's apartment, the kind of silence that was never truly silent, thick with distant traffic hums and the low vibration of a city refusing to sleep. Every evening, Iris arrived with her violin case and left with aching fingers, because they practiced every night without exception. The routine carved deep grooves into their lives, turning hours into something intimate and relentless. Somewhere along the way, the dynamic shifted, no longer simply mentor and student, as unspoken tension and shared exhaustion filled the air. As weeks blurred together, Iris noticed unsettling details that did not belong to a normal routine. Junho never answered calls, his phone silent except for sharp text alerts. The television blared at a volume that made her flinch, sound spilling into every corner. Sometimes, when she spoke from behind him, her words vanished until she touched his arm and he reacted as if jolted awake from a nightmare. One night, they sat on the sofa with the score spread across their laps, pages rustling softly as they turned. Their shoulders touched by accident, a contact neither acknowledged but both felt. A lamp cast a warm halo over the music as Iris leaned forward and traced a line on the page. "This crescendo needs to be softer, like a whisper." Junho frowned, frustration lining his face as he shook his head, rejecting the idea outright. The room felt smaller as his response came sharp and unyielding.
No, louder. The brass needs to come in hard.
Iris straightened and gestured at the score, emotion breaking through her composure. That ruins the mood. It is supposed to be dying away. Junho's restraint snapped, his voice rising with a brittle edge that made Iris flinch.
It needs to be audible.
The words struck Iris like a slap, and anger tangled with confusion. It is audible. Are you deaf? Junho froze as color drained from his face. He stood and retreated across the apartment as if distance might protect him. Understanding struck Iris with cruel clarity as memories aligned. She rose and took a hesitant step after him. Junho, he did not turn, his shoulders rigid as if bracing for impact. Junho. Silence stretched between them as Iris crossed the room and gently reached for his arm. He jerked away and spun toward her, eyes wild.
Do not sneak up on me.
Iris stared at him as realization set in. Oh, you did not hear me? You did not hear me scream. Something inside Junho collapsed, leaving a frightened man unable to hide the truth.
No, and I did not.
The question slipped from Iris before she could soften it. How long? Junho exhaled shakily and answered as if confessing a crime.
6 months ago it started. It comes and goes. Sometimes it is fine, sometimes it is just static.
He sank onto the sofa and buried his face in his hands.
I have 2 months left, maybe less. Then it is gone forever.
Iris sat beside him, aching as she tried to understand how he carried this alone. Why are you doing this concert? Why torture yourself? Junho lifted his head, eyes shining, his voice raw but resolute.
Because I need to hear it one last time. I need to hear you. You are the only thing that cuts through the fog, Iris. Your playing has color. When my ears fail, I can still see your music.
Emotion overwhelmed Iris as she reached for his hand and held it tightly. Okay, we will do it. We will make it the loudest, brightest sunset the world has ever seen. Fear flickered across Junho's face as he voiced the question that haunted him.
What if I cannot hear the orchestra?
Iris squeezed his hand, grounding him. Then you watch me. I will be your ears. You lead them, but I will lead you. The Seoul Arts Center stood like a cathedral of glass and stone, its vast halls humming with anticipation long before the first note was meant to be played. Outside, banners fluttered in the cold air, and inside, every corridor carried the muffled echo of footsteps, tuning instruments, and whispered expectations. On this day, the building was not merely hosting a concert, it was holding its breath. Behind the polished walls and velvet curtains, power struggles unfolded quietly, sharpened by ambition and fear. The board's decision had already been made in secret rooms, their verdict heavy and merciless. Junho was no longer welcome, as his presence threatened the illusion of perfection sold to donors and patrons alike. Director Kim moved through the corridors with righteous fury, clutching his triumph like a weapon. He had learned of Junho's hearing loss through suspicion rather than concern, and that suspicion drove him to corruption. A discreet bribe and a sealed envelope put private medical records in his hands, transformed into ammunition. 2 hours before the concert, when panic would bloom fastest and resistance would be weakest, he pushed open the dressing room door with intent that was anything but subtle. The dressing room was a small island of calm amid the storm, lit by warm bulbs around a mirror and scented faintly with cologne and rosin. Junho sat at its center in his tuxedo, the black fabric crisp against his still posture. His hands rested lightly on his knees, his eyes focused inward. That calm sharpened the contrast when Kim stormed in, footsteps loud, breath uneven, a medical file clenched in his fist.
You're finished, Vesio. A deaf conductor is a farce. I'm canceling the performance. The vice conductor will take the podium.
The file slid across the table and stopped inches from Junho's hands, its presence an accusation. Junho did not flinch, remaining seated with relaxed shoulders and a steady gaze. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant murmur of the audience filling the hall, and his composure hardened into quiet defiance.
You can't cancel it. The house is full.
Kim's restraint shattered as authority slipped from argument into threat. He leaned forward and slammed his hands onto the table, the medical file rustling beneath his palms. The room felt smaller, the air tighter, as if the walls themselves were listening.
I can remove you for medical incompetence.
Before Kim could press further, Iris stepped forward from near the door, violin case at her side. Her posture was straight and her expression unyielding as she moved into the light, drawing the room's focus to her. If he doesn't conduct, I don't play. Kim let out a short, derisive laugh and looked Iris over with open contempt. To him, she was an inconvenience, an unpredictable variable that refused to fit into institutional hierarchy.
You're a street busker.
Iris met Kim's gaze steadily, her confidence anchored by facts he could not erase. The mirror lights reflected sharply in her eyes, as if she were already standing on stage before thousands. Check the social media. The concert is sold out because of the mystery violinist. If I walk, the audience riots. The color drained from Kim's face before surging back in red as he realized the trap too late. Public loyalty boxed him in tighter than any moral argument. When he spoke again, it was through gritted teeth, conceding ground without admitting defeat.
Fine, go out there, embarrass yourselves.
The door fell silent behind Kim as he left, his anger lingering like an unresolved note. Junho turned toward Iris, the calm in his eyes giving way to something more fragile and human.
You lied.
Iris stepped closer, closing the space between them until the noise of the world seemed to fade. Her answer came immediately, certain and prepared. They are here for us. Are you ready? Junho inhaled slowly as fear crept in through the cracks of his discipline. He confessed it without drama, honest and bare.
I can't hear my own voice right now.
Iris lifted her hands to his cheeks, her touch warm and grounding. She leaned in and kissed him briefly, tender and reassuring, then searched his face with her eyes. Can you feel that? Junho's breath caught as sensation anchored him to the present, to her and to the music waiting beyond the door.
Yes.
Iris smiled and rested her forehead briefly against his. In that quiet moment, the strategy became clear, choosing connection over sound and trust over fear. Then you're ready, follow my eyes. The stage breathed at 8 o'clock in the evening, alive beneath the weight of hundreds of bodies and expectations. Applause surged like a physical force, rolling through the hall in waves that rattled the chandeliers and seeped into the wood. Junho felt it through the soles of his shoes, through his bones, through the podium itself, a seismic affirmation of presence and demand. Yet in his head, there was only a vast, merciless silence. The world was loud without him. He stepped onto the podium with deliberate care, every movement slowed by awareness. The polished wood felt distant and unreal, as if he were stepping into a memory rather than a moment. When he lifted the baton, the air itself seemed to pause, suspended between anticipation and dread. Silence expanded as pressure, squeezing his chest as panic rose and tightened around his throat. His gaze found Iris as if pulled by gravity. Across the sea of instruments and faces, she locked eyes with him, her presence sharp and undeniable. In that single glance lived years of rehearsals, shared failures, and fragile victories. She nodded, small and precise, and the unspoken command landed with both authority and faith. Junho brought the baton down, and the orchestra began. He could not hear the first note, nor the second, nor the swelling harmony that followed, but he saw it. Music erupted into color, blooming violently and beautifully from Iris's violin as indigo ribbons spilled outward, threaded with pulsing crimson. His synesthesia ignited, turning sound into vision and fear into motion as he conducted color instead of sound. The orchestra followed Iris, orbiting her melody as if she were a star holding them in place. Through her bow, she told a story without words, of a man watching his world fracture and foundations crumble quietly, of loss that arrived with a slow and unbearable fading. Junho followed, translating despair into arcs and lines only he could see. The climax arrived like a held breath finally released. The final movement thinned, weakening like a dying heartbeat, echoing into darkness as colors drained toward gray. In that unraveling, Junho faltered, his hands hesitating as doubt rushed back in, cold and sharp. Then Iris improvised. A single high note rose, unwritten and defiant, cutting through the fading spectrum like a blade of pure white light. That note did not belong to the score, but to him, anchoring Junho and reminding him who he was and why he stood there. He brought the baton down for the final chord and held it there, suspending the moment as if time itself obeyed his hand. When he finally turned, the audience stood as one, a forest of bodies in motion and faces alight with awe. He looked back to Iris. "I love you." Junho bowed to her, not as a conductor to a soloist, but as a man acknowledging the one who had given him sound when he had none. 1 year had passed, measured not by calendars or anniversaries, but by the slow settling of life into a new, quieter rhythm. The house on Jeju Island stood open to the sea, its wooden bones warmed by salt air and sun. Silence lived there, not an empty silence, but one thick with presence. It wrapped around the rooms, clung to the eaves, and stretched outward toward the endless horizon where the ocean breathed in long, patient waves. Junho sat on the porch, his body angled toward the water as if memory itself still pulled him in that direction. He could no longer hear the surf crashing against the rocks below, but he knew its movement by sight and by the faint tremor that traveled through the wood beneath him. Deafness had closed one door completely, sealing it shut without mercy, yet it had sharpened every other threshold through which the world reached him. The world now came to him in colors and textures, in subtle shifts of light and shadow. The blue of the sea was not merely blue. It was layered with silver, green, and a distant gray that hinted at depth. These colors felt like echoes of sound, after images of a life once filled with noise. They lingered softly in his vision, faint but persistent, like memories that refused to fade. When Iris approached, Junho sensed her before he saw her. The air seemed to change around him, carrying her warmth and familiar gravity. She placed a mug of coffee into his hand, guiding his fingers around its curve. The ceramic was warm, grounding him and anchoring him in the present. This, too, was sound now, the language of temperature, pressure, and intention. Without a word, Iris lifted her violin. The instrument caught the light, its polished wood glowing softly, as if aware of its purpose. She gently pressed it against Junho's chest, right over his heart. Her movements were slow and deliberate, reverent even, transforming a simple action into something ceremonial. When she drew the bow across the strings, the motion was smooth and tender. Junho heard nothing. There was no melody, no rise or fall of notes in the way he once understood them. Yet the sound arrived all the same, translated into vibration. It traveled through the violin into his chest and then deeper, through bone and muscle, resonating inside him. The hum spread outward, filling spaces he had not known were empty and stitching sensation into meaning. In that moment, he saw a flash of gold behind his eyes. It was not a memory or a hallucination, but a feeling made visible. A sudden warmth, luminous and alive. It pulsed gently in time with the vibration, like a small sun blooming within him. He smiled, the expression rising naturally and effortlessly, as if guided by something older than thought.
It is beautiful.
Iris lowered the violin slightly and met his gaze. Her hands moved with practiced grace, each gesture clear and intentional, shaped by years of shared language and trust. Her expression softened as she communicated what the music was meant to be, not just sound, but comfort, safety, and rest. It is a lullaby. Junho's eyes crinkled with quiet amusement. He lifted his hands in response, his movements confident and playful, infused with affection. The silence between them was no barrier. It was a canvas upon which intimacy was painted in motion and touch.
I do not need a lullaby, I need a kiss.
They leaned together, foreheads touching, breath shared. The ocean continued its unseen song behind them, and the house held their stillness like a secret. Seo Junho had lost sound, but in its absence, he had discovered something vast and profound. A universe built not from noise, but from feeling, connection, and a love that needed no voice to be heard.